U.S. elections. Can we expect a shift in U.S. external policy? Moderated by Ms. Valerie Hopkins, Balkan Investigative Reporting Network.
So thank you all very much for joining us for this panel, U.S. elections. Can we expect a shift in external policy? I think there's a lot to discuss. It's been a very exciting campaign period, so I think we should just get down to the question. Ambassador Laura Kennedy, thank you for coming all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us here today. What do you think? Can we expect a shift in external policy?
Okay, well, first, if I might, I just wanted to say this is my first time in Montenegro, so I just want to take the opportunity to thank our Montenegrin hosts and also congratulate them on their candidacy to NATO. Okay, it depends obviously on who's elected. I think we now know who the two candidates are, so I'm not going to spend much time talking about Sanders. I don't think he has a viable path to nomination, but I certainly can if people are interested. Okay, President Clinton, I would expect that, no, you would not see radical shifts. I mean, this is someone who believes firmly in the liberal international order. She is a multilateralist. She believes very firmly in her alliances, that this is the source of American strength all around the globe, and specifically on NATO. Yes, she also has, during the campaign season, as she has before, said indeed NATO members should pay more. At the same time, she has missed hardly an opportunity through this campaign to single out, in particular, NATO as the world's most successful military, defensive alliance. In terms of difference, and she has, of course, wrapped herself in the mantle of Obama. On the other hand, I think you would see some differences with his policy. I think it's a known fact that, for example, on Syria, she had indeed argued for a more engaged policy in terms of earlier arming the moderate opposition, safe zones, and so on. Trump, I think the choice would be as stark as we've ever seen it. Some have likened his this America First, harking back to Charles Lindbergh. I would argue that a much more relevant key would be Robert Taft in the 40s, who opposed Lend-Lease to Britain, who opposed NATO, who did not believe that we should engage militarily to contain the Soviet Union, was very much in terms of trade, mercantilist and so on. So there is this old strain in American foreign policy. However, that was what? 60 some years ago. And indeed, but those views did represent a serious strand in American foreign policy. They were rejected, and I will be clear about my biases, and I hope indeed they are again, because I think it would be frankly quite devastating in the international arena. By contrast, I don't think he's met an alliance he does like. He has, of course, been very outspoken about NATO not paying its share, but I think, frankly, even if all the 28, soon to be 29, pay their, come up to that 2% mark, that would not suffice for Donald Trump. I think he sees alliances as entangling and problematic, and this goes for all alliances, Japan, Korea, and it's not, I would submit, just an issue of money. I think, for example, on Korea, he's expressed the view before that we could be dragged into a nuclear war with North Korea, so better go in and just assassinate Kim Jong-un. But also, I would say that there is a real coherence to his policies. He's written a number of books over the years. The titles, I think, tell you much just by the titles. Crippled America, Time to Get Tough are two of them. But many of these views go back to the 80s. That said, I would also say that there's some real inconsistencies in what he says, despite the fact that I think there is some real coherence in his foreign policy views, which I can, anyhow, I've gone on too long, but my views on the candidates.
Thank you, Ambassador Kennedy. Julian, you are the Vice President of the Atlantic Treaty Association. How do you view the potential changes in U.S. foreign policy, and how much of it actually depends on the U.S.?
Well, thank you, Valerie, and it's great to be here as ever. I think the real question that most Europeans want answering is Donald Trump's hair real? I kind of love you Yanks. I mean, it's this wonderful soap opera, and for a Brit, as I was watching the other night with the whole Illinois thing, I'm reminded of Churchill's famous quote about the Americans, that one can normally rely upon the United States to reach the right conclusion, but only after every other option has been exhausted. And I think we're kind of there. Options are being exhausted. But being serious for a moment, look, I believe in the United States. I believe in American leadership. That's why I believe in our alliance. And this is a dangerous moment. I also believe in democracy, and one has to respect the democratic process in all our countries. I do believe the United States is moving towards a fundamental shift in its external policy, not because of what will happen with the White House. The American system of checks and balances, whatever happens in November, will again work, of that I'm sure. What I'm concerned about is that on the watch of a President Trump or a President Clinton will be perhaps the greatest shift in power that the United States will have to address. The United States sits at the hub, the heart of the new West. The West as an idea, not a place. It's the hub of the worldwide West. And because it's the hub of the worldwide West, its leadership responsibilities are growing by the day. And we've had sequestration, et cetera, which really have undermined long-term, not just defense planning, but the wider security policy planning of the United States, which will clearly come to an end soon. But my point is this, that the United States is the only truly global power. It's challenged on both its western and its eastern flanks by emerging illiberal power in various forms. And what will change US external policy, to my mind, more than anything, is if we Europeans do not recognize our place in the American strategic dilemma. By free riding, as many of us are, we are warping America's strategic choices. And it's that sense of an America under growing pressure, an America with free-riding allies, which is feeding into the election debate. And it's that narrative that we Europeans have to get real about. Because the bottom line is this, whether it's Clinton or Trump, unless we support the United States in its leadership role, then I fear that not only will pressure grow domestically for some kind of decoupling, implicit or explicit, but also the very idea of the West. And I'm an old-fashioned chauvinist about the West. I believe the world's a safer place when the West is strong. And that requires we Europeans to understand our role in that global mission, and specifically to understand the role of NATO in supporting the Americans to be strong where they need to be. And that's the key about European support for the United States. We must keep the Americans strong where they need to be. So let's look beyond the wonderful soap opera that we're witnessing nightly on CNN. There's one final comment on that, by the way, which is, perhaps the Americans can answer this question, but why every time I watch CNN and they have these panels of experts, they all have this rather mad, fixated smile on their faces? Have you noticed that? So you turn on, there's a fixated smile you get. I really would like to understand, how we escape from that kind of coverage. But the fundamental strategic questions are the ones that matter here. The election must be respected, but we cannot, as Europeans, dismiss what America's going through simply as an internal American process. This is a structural moment in the West's development, and we need to grip that as an alliance and as allies.
Thanks very much. Well, I do think Americans are proud of their pearly white teeth, so I guess
true.
that's part of the
Don't
CNN
talk to the Brits
factor.
about teeth. That's right.
Ambassador Stefanini, you are a former representative of Italy to NATO and a former diplomatic advisor to the Italian president. How do you respond to Julian's argument that so many of the Western powers are free riding on American power, and how can we recalibrate that relationship?
Well, Julian is basically right. He's largely right. Let me go back to your original question was, will these elections bring a shift in American foreign policy? I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it is already happening. I do not disagree with the way Laura has portrayed both candidates. Hillary Clinton will be an Atlanticist, Donald Trump a Luscano. I think the point is that if you listen to Donald Trump foreign policy speech, forget one moment about the inconsistencies, because we, meaning what you call the elite, notice the inconsistencies. The people, the electors, listen to what he actually says. They don't pay that much attention to the inconsistency. And foreign policy might be an important component of his narrative. His basic narrative is the system is broken. We cannot trust the people who made the system to fix it. And obviously, his opponent, Clinton, will be one participator in the system. In foreign policy, we have to first protect our borders, our interests, and then think about others. And all his narrative will go down that way. And that does resonate with the public. Trump has a unique capacity, we were talking about that with Bob last night, to bring his opponent on his turf in terms of debate. Not necessarily winning, but just, and that will force the debate to, on foreign policy to an extent we haven't seen in recent American elections. The strain that resonates in Trump is, and to some extent also in Bernie Sanders voters, cannot be totally ignored. Yes, it was rejected in the 50s and the 60s, but that was the 50s and the 60s. It has not been rejected now. So the future president, say, be President Clinton, will be an Atlanticist, but will also ask the allies to do more. I mean, there will be two issues. One, America will look hard into the issue at stake to decide whether or not it is in its interest to be engaged. Second, it will depend on whether or not the allies or partners are taking their share of the burden. And this is very much, this is already present in Barack Obama's foreign policy. If you wish, Obama is a gentler and softer version of of the message that the president, the future next president of the United States will give. And possibly the War Summit is the last chance we Europeans and allies have to listen and to not just pay lip service as we always listen to the 2% and we pay lip service to do it, and then we go back to our old ways. This is the last chance to listen and not to wait for not sit in the fence and wait for the next president who will be more assertive. By the way, if we wait for the next tenant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I think also the current tenant of the Kremlin would be better off not waiting for the next tenant because he would be tougher. He or she will be tougher. Thank you.
So just to follow up, actually, and then we can go back and forth. You know, the Donald has said that NATO is obsolete. Bernie has said that he opposes any sort of expansion. Yet here we are sitting in Montenegro, heralding Montenegro's soon accession to NATO. What can be done to prove both Donald and Bernie wrong? How can we prove them wrong? I was thinking to start with Ambassador Stefanini,
Well,
but if
absolutely.
you want to jump in, go ahead.
No.
I mean, if I'm correct, Trump made the remark specifically saying the main threat today is the terrorism and jihadism. NATO doesn't do counterterrorism, therefore NATO is obsolete. My answer would be he's onto something. If NATO is not able to respond to sort of hybrid security threats like terrorism, NATO will lose its central position as the hub of Western security, because there is a threat which is not the conventional threat. I call it hybrid. I call it terrorist plus because when we deal with the Islamic State, you have a territory, not a state, that does terrorism as a main tool. It's not just a state sponsoring terrorism. Someone will have to respond to it, I mean, for our own security. If NATO does not it will be some other form of response. That would be the first step. And this is why it makes so important that in Warsaw, NATO makes it clear that it's prepared to face also what Senator Schwab yesterday talked about the Southern strategy. Because that will reassure that NATO remains the centerpiece of Western security.
Let me add to that, if I may, Valerie. First, one should never take too seriously some of the things that are said in the nomination campaigns. And this is a kind of 19th century American election. And if you think this is rough, you should try see some of the 19th century versions. So yes, they're appealing to their base, Sanders and Trump, and they're desperate because their problem is how to reach beyond that base once the general election starts. So, okay, we hear what they say. To me, Warsaw is an important summit, but it's not the important summit in the next 2 years because of the presidential elections. The really important summit is the first summit, and I'd actually like to see it as a Washington summit, after the new administration's in position, because then we can get down to serious business. I've had a very modest success, and I'm claiming this, that I've convinced the British government that we send our new carrier strike group with our new 2,500-ton aircraft carrier, plus Type 45 destroyers and Astute-class nuclear attack submarines, we send them to Norfolk, Virginia first. And we invite congressmen and women and senators on board for ship visits to say to Americans and the American taxpayer, look, there are European allies really building big stuff to support your leadership. So we've got to kill the narrative that it's all free riding and that no Europeans are doing serious issues. Now, the key issue for me at the summit after the election will be the 20% on equipment, 2% on GDP question. I think when we drafted that at Wales, the defence guidance, that it really was a kind of aspiration. We still hoped the world would get better. The world clearly has not got better since Wales. Warsaw must recognise that, and I think the first thing a new administration, Clinton or Trump, will say to Europeans, forget the within a decade bit. We want 2%, 20% within 5 years, not because it's going to solve all the problems, but if you spend 2%, it's better than spending 1%. And that commitment will show to Americans of all persuasions that we Europeans are waking up to the reality of the world in which we live, and that we want to renew the partnership. But if we go on just paring away at the edges of our defence, or making small increases that are below the level of defence cost inflation, that creates the space of the Trumps to cause trouble. I mean, I was fascinated, by the way, by the use of this America First moniker when he made that speech, because the America First Committee was a committee set up in September 1940 by hardline isolationists to prevent America's involvement in World War II. Now, I don't know whether that was deliberate or whether that was by accident, but there clearly is a constituency, and I very much hope that we Europeans, as Europeans, seize the message that we're getting from this campaign? Deal for once decisively by going to Americans and say, look, we understand, we're getting there, we're ready. Because whether it's Clinton or Trump, that question is coming from our American allies.
I would say that one of the things that's interesting about this election, and maybe I'm wrong and Sanders will have some, take 80% of every single primary that's to come, but I don't think so. So we know then that the next president of the United States will be a New Yorker. So in terms of what has NATO done for us lately, this actually is a narrative that Hillary Clinton, for one, as a New Yorker, has played upon constantly. And I think it would be useful if Donald Trump does not get that message for Europeans to remind them that September 11th, the defense clause was invoked, and NATO stood with America in Afghanistan, our longest war ever, that we've ever engaged in. This, to me, is an ongoing and a very real lesson of what this alliance has done for America. So I hope, indeed, every single country that has contributed, soldiers, good, whatever, reminds Mr. Trump of this. Hillary Clinton does not need a reminder of that. Now, in terms of, say, what Europe, what the United States looks to Europe for, I mean, in some ways I think it's more an EU question than NATO. Sanctions, for one. In terms of, say, Hillary, again, I'm talking about Clinton. I think she will look to Europe to keep sanctions on Ukraine. I think North Korea, we all know, is a massive problem. I think despite the fact that we already have very intense sanctions on North Korea, I think that they will probably try and ratchet them further. And again, Iran is a perfect case, and this is something that Clinton was very proud of. Yeah. You had a double-track strategy. Yeah. The United States led, I think, in terms of ratcheting them up. It was enormously successful. And then we had an important constituency to do the negotiation. So again, I think these are the same sorts of approaches we're going to need to deal with, as you say, extraordinarily difficult issues out there.
Absolutely.
Ambassador Kennedy, you mentioned Hillary and her role in 9/11, or her time as a senator in 9/11, and some of her detractors call her a hawk for her vote on Iraq. What do you think we could expect from Hillary as president, from her foreign policy?
Well, I mean, I think, as I had said before, that she's very much, I think, she believes in the liberal international order. She believes very strongly in our alliances around the world, that this is the currency of a successful, way to deal with what is, as you say, a very, very dangerous world. I do think, though, that you probably will see a more, muscular, perhaps, because I think it is unfair to call her a hawk. And it's interesting. We talk about defense budgets now. Obama has, our panel is framed in terms of all the cuts in defense. I actually think that's overstated. It says 20%. I mean, I've seen analyses that say it's really 15%, and then, of course, he started off with increases. Then there was maybe a cumulative 15%, and it's going up again. Now, in addition to, say, conventional, look at what Obama is embarking on. The president of the Prague Agenda, modernization of the entire triad. I mean, although, unfortunately, it's the fact that all three legs of these old systems, Cold War systems, are aging out. But this is conceivably a $1 trillion price tag. So I don't think that it's correct to say that this is a president who has, slashing defense budgets. I think it's, on the other hand, a real question as to what will happen to that. Yep. Donald Trump, again, has said that our nuclear systems are, he has used the word rotten, they're falling apart. And I thought, but he must not know that, for example, as Commander-in-Chief, you must certify to Congress every year that the nuclear arsenal is safe, secure, and reliable. So I'm not quite sure what he's talking about, other than the fact that, again, the strategic systems, and we have here an expert on this, Sandy Birchbow, are aging out. But this is a big price tag, and I would say that, again, Hillary Clinton would do, presidents typically do at the outside of the administration, commission a nuclear posture review. I would assume that under President Clinton, assuming there's a President Clinton, you will see an absolute top to bottom nuclear posture review. That will, of course, have to take count of what the system out there is, because we all know disarmament does not take place in a vacuum.
And QDR as well.
And if I might, I wanted to pick up, I think, Stephanie, you had said that the Russians would expect a tougher presidency in both Clinton and Trump. I actually would disagree. I would think that they would far prefer a Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Somebody who not only has spoken repeatedly in terms of his admiration of a tough guy, this is someone who does not put a premium on human rights, rule of the way Clinton is, that's a trademark of hers, and of course Obama's. Moreover, the sliding references he's made to the EU, to NATO, and so on, alliances, this would be, I would think, tailor-made to the Kremlin. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that Trump would be, in many ways, someone they would look forward to.
I can give you a right of reply there.
Yes, I did not say, and
Maybe I
if I said it,
misunderstood.
I might have expressed myself wrongly. I did not say that the Russians expect a tougher toward them next president. I only said that the Russians, as well as the Europeans, would be better off considering what they can achieve with Barack Obama still in office, rather than wait for the next president. It is quite clear, I fully agree with you, that there is a strong temptation in Moscow to join the pro-Trump campaign, which might or might be the right choice, the strategic or a tragic mistake from Russia's point of view. But what I was saying is just that the Warsaw Summit is an opportunity to move forward. And then the message that the summit will send is actually, there will be a threefold message from the West. The message will result on what the Warsaw Summit decides, which is up to the NATO countries. The message will result from the renewal or not renewal or limitation of the EU sanctions to Russia. And the third leg will be Brexit. Because we have to be very clear, whether or not there is Brexit, it will be a different NATO and a different summit. You may even make a case that a decision over Brexit, which in my view would be a tragedy for Europe, for the UK, and in general for the world, but it might be, they might have a silver lining for NATO, because at that point NATO remains the only container where you have you keep Europe together. But Moscow will read the West depending on these three elements.
Can I reply to the B word?
Of course you can.
The B word has been mentioned. It's kind of reverse D-Day. And one, I generally hope, it's going to be tight, but I hope we don't, for reasons Stephanie's right about, for strategic reasons. At the same time, I think the Brits are right about the need to reform the EU, and the United States should be backing the UK on some of these issues about democracy and all these sort of issues. But a couple of points about a President Clinton, if I may, because I'm backing President Clinton. First of all, it would be fantastic to have the first woman president of the United States, because it says something about the societies that we're becoming. We're becoming societies, and the European society is the same, of all the talents, irrespective of gender or race. Yesterday, a Muslim was elected as mayor of London. Fantastic. This is great. This is our comparative advantage. We should stand up for those values as Europeans and Americans together. So I fully back that. What really worries me about a President Clinton is the idea that she would be under constant threat of impeachment over this email business, that there'll be a kind of Kenneth Starr-like figure who dogs the presidency all the time. So I hope that that is put to bed fairly quickly, because to my mind, a President Clinton, with her experience and her understanding of the world and her understanding of leadership, she would offer the most coherent vision for the alliance and its place in American grand strategy. But a couple of years ago, I asked her a question at a meeting in Washington. She was banging on about NATO and the European allies. And I said, well, Madam Secretary, just what exactly is it you want from we European allies? And she couldn't answer it. So I would hope that we move beyond the kind of frustration with European allies, and Warsaw can help this, to a new agenda from the new administration about what burden sharing means in the 21st century. Does it mean specifically military investment or defense investment? Does it mean cyber? Does it mean hybrid warfare investment? Does it mean other engagements? For example, the UK spends 7.4% of its GDP on security, of which 2.1% is on defense. Do we include a broader concept of security investment? Because if you look at the likes of IS-Daesh or hybrid warfare a la Russia, it's not purely military capability that's going to actually deter and defend, and indeed effect. So I really would like to see a new administration sit down with its allies and start thinking about what does security defense actually mean in the 21st century, so that we don't bang on about arguments that actually have no place in resolving that particular dilemma.
I just want to add, I fully agree. I think we have to move away from the 2% theology, but constructively. Europe has to show what it's bringing to the plate, which could be different, and discuss it with and this obviously has to be with the next American administration. But what I meant when I was talking about toughness of the new president is that we can expect on the free riding issue not to be raised in a doctoral interview with the Atlantic magazine, but in policy, whoever is the new president.
And one quick plea, if I may.
Okay.
Please, before June 23rd, don't say anything that belittles Britain. We are the 5th biggest economy in the world, a top 5 military actor. Our military investment program is bigger than the rest of Europe put together if one excludes France. So be careful, please, ladies and gentlemen, because it's going to be a close-run thing, and it wouldn't take much to tip it over the balance. Just before the President arrived in Britain, I wrote a piece called, "Mr. President, please do no harm." My judgment is out as to whether he did.
Julian, you've just laid a roadmap for an ideal situation, how to improve Euro-Atlantic security and global security. But what about the other potential contender? The Donald is willing, it seems, to upend a lot of global order. He sees the world through a purely economic lens. He's mentioned that he would be okay with Japan and North Korea developing nuclear weapons. He wants to have a colonialist approach in Iraq and take all the oil. Is there a contingency plan in Europe for a potential Trump win? And I will ask you the same if there's one in Washington.
Well, I will leave this to the Europeans to say that if I were still on government roles, I would say, and I think there's some real truth to this. One, as you know, we don't talk politics. It's strictly forbidden for public servants. But we would probably talk about continuity in U.S. foreign policy. We would say that, despite views of X, Y, and Z, we have career bureaucracies that provide the continuity, the core bedrock principles. And that is true. At the same time, I would say that the system would have an enormous shock if it were to be Trump, because, for one thing, the foreign policy establishment is so largely with Clinton. And what is so extraordinary about this election is not only do you have the standard bearers of the Republican Party, Presidents Bush, both of them saying they will not endorse, the Speaker of the House, and so on, but the Republican sort of brains trust in foreign policy, coordinated by Elliot Cohen, for those who know him, put out an extraordinarily long list of Republican intellectual stalwarts saying this man is, a threat, a great threat. And so, I mean, I'm not sure who he would stock his administration with. But I'm very interested in what.
Well, if I may add, when I read the speech America First, I felt there was a bit missing. It was kind of America first, Russia second, China third, and Europe maybe fourth. I think you might have a situation a bit like the first year of Bush 2, where there was a kind of radicalism, where Trump tried to see foreign policy as an extension of business, so that he'd be trying to do deals everywhere and see it as a kind of extension of his business empire. But within a year, you began to see the realities of international relations start to reassert themselves, and the administration become more sophisticated about how it engaged, not least because it had 9/11 to contend with. So, in a sense, there's a great new book by Professor Mary Beard about the history of Rome. Fantastic. Absolutely, it's wonderful. And there's a quote she has in it, which she says, "The emperors did not make the empire made the emperors." And I think if a Trump presidency would very quickly be disabused of some of his more simplistic fantasies. And he's a businessman. The good side of Trump, he's a businessman. He kind of knows when a deal's not working. And I think then you would start to see some serious heavy hitters brought in to stabilize it. But we could be in for certainly a year of rockiness as some of his more outlandish ideas are experimented with.
I'm already on, I think with President Trump we'd be in uncharted waters. So I take your precedent, but I don't think there is any precedent to refer to. I'm already on record for saying that Europeans have no contingency plan. The point here, the Europeans could be excused because the Republican Party has no contingency plan, and we see it happening now. What is interesting that since February, the Republican Party has tried to stop Donald Trump to no effect, actually.
Yeah.
It has even strengthened his primary result. You wonder if this is going to happen also in general election. The contingency plan would be the Europeans would have to think how to manage by themselves, which we haven't done. We haven't done so far. We should start thinking hard. It's not that we don't want to deal with or be allied of the U.S. led by President Trump, but since we cannot rely on what it will be, how are we going to handle it? With or without Brexit? I mean, that would be because it would be a new situation for Europe, yeah, and for the rest of the world also.
Well, I think the good news, I mean, and this is grist for yet another panel, is that he's not going to win. Political, neophyte political pundit that I am. But you mentioned the businessman. But I think that is, again, a fundamental flaw of this person. He's a transactional player, not a leader. He uses business references that are completely antithetical to foreign policy or running a state. For example, now I have a feeling that probably every state represented here probably has some money invested in U.S. Treasury bonds. Well, he said something absolutely extraordinary to me just the other day. He said, we all know the U.S. has a large debt, and servicing this debt, very expensive. That's true. He said, what we ought to do is not pay 100% on the dollar, negotiate it, and bring it down. Now this, of course, is something he's taken from his business experience, because when you declare a bankruptcy,
because
your creditors will be happy to take whatever it is, because that may be, but this is the United States, who's, in terms of a safe haven, capital formation, so on, this is a real international, important role and a stabilizing role, and to suggest that the United States would not be a full faith is just extraordinary.
But I mean, that perhaps is the biggest danger, that Trump could inadvertently end the entire Bretton Woods post-war consensus on America being the reserve currency. And it's a sort of radicalism that Trump could think about if it meant just challenging the rest of the world. So yeah, there is that danger. Hey-ho.
With that, I think we should open it up to the audience. I see we have a question in the front. Just wait for the mic and please introduce yourself.
My name is Daniel Serwer. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Julian has already preempted a bit my question because it's about the usefulness of aircraft carriers to confront today's security issues. I mean, they may be helpful, but they're clearly not the solution. Our problems today arise from governance issues. And they arise from governance issues inside our own countries, degree of integration of our populations, especially of Muslims into our populations. And they arise from governance issues in the autocratic secular regimes of the Middle East. And, you know, NATO isn't the obvious response to those issues, nor is military equipment in general. So do we need another sort of alliance, or do we need a NATO with broadened mandate? How do we face up to the governance issues that are at the root of our insecurities?
Shall we go with that first? Daniel, you're right, but they look really good, big aircraft carriers, and they impress people. I mean, in my book Little Britain, which I wrote last year about Britain's place in the world, very much those sort of things have a kind of strategic branding. So they have a strategic influence role as well as a war-fighting role in extremis. So the idea that the Brits sail into Norfolk at a particularly crucial moment in your electoral cycle or your political cycle with a large carrier strike group, that will surprise a lot of Americans and they'll say, wow, you know, we have an ally who's doing this kind of thing, and that will have an impact. It'll impress the Chinese, who think in these terms as well, and the Russians. That's why all these countries are investing in this kind of kit. The reality is that unless you've got that hard power underpinning, all your other soft power tools about which you're rightly talking are ultimately not negated but diluted. And this is the European problem, that many of our ideas about governance, which the EU is at the forefront of, and rightly so, when you speak to the Indians or the Chinese or other emergent powers, especially the Russians, they still come back with that basic Stalinist quote about how many divisions do you have. So it's almost like an entry fee into be taken strategically serious to have this kind of kit. So I actually believe the Brits were right to invest in these kind of assets because of that precise issue of demonstrating capability. Then there is the real issue about keeping America strong. When I see the commitments of the United States and Asia Pacific, and I see what China's doing in the South China Sea, my nightmare scenario is a simultaneous crisis in South China Sea, the Middle East, and Europe, in which the US can't be in all three places at once in strength. And it will need European allies to look after this theatre as effective first responders in certain scenarios. And my plea to both Warsaw and indeed what I would hope be the Washington summit of the summer of next year is that we return NATO to the fundamental principles of worst-case planning. But worst-case planning of all kinds of threats, and we do it together. That includes the non-military aspects that you rightly talk about and their relationship with the military aspects. Because it strikes me the reason we're in this mess, and we're in a mess, forget all the rhetoric about, you know, this and that. Europe's in a mess, and right now the alliance could be in a mess unless we go back to these fundamental principles. And what's particularly caused this mess is Europeans for too long have only been prepared to recognize as much threat as we believe we can afford. Let's put the alliance back on firm standing based on a proper analysis of what's out there, and then decide what mix of governance and capability we need to deal with it. And I think that will send a deterrent message that's as powerful as any you could imagine.
If I was just going to say that I think Professor Serwer is absolutely right, though, in terms of what the challenges are in today's world. Yes, you do need a strong defense, but we all know that national means is not just a matter of your military, but it's a sound economy and a sound government and so on. And again, just to contrast the two choices we have facing us, we have Trump, who has repeatedly expressed admiration for the guiding principle of toughness, being a tough guy. I mean, he seems to have an absolute preference for dictators. Whereas Hillary Clinton has very specifically tried to talk about the importance of using all of your tools, yes, military power, development, diplomacy, and the economic tools. So I think, indeed, in terms of her own record of reaching out and encouraging inclusiveness, whether it's female empowerment or ethnic inclusivity, I think this is certainly someone who absolutely understands and will support the need to challenge those issues.
By the way, I asked the same question then to the then chairman of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Di Paola, and we were on the deck of the U.S. Eisenhower. That was 2009 at NATO. It was all about Afghanistan then, and I asked, but do we really need all this? Obviously, Gianpaolo Di Paola, being a Navy man, said yes. Well, and the answer was exactly like yours, Julian, because he said it is power projection, which another way to say they look good. But I want to try to answer your question about is it NATO or we need something else? Please, let's not start with a new international institution first. We can use what we have. NATO is a political military organization. It has an Article 4, and it has a large political outreach in terms of partnership. It can use more of it and can work on areas which are not strictly military in terms of response with our institutions, the EU first. And also, there is a military component in response to the threat. It is not just military, but there is also a military component, which the new ISIS model compared to Al-Qaeda makes it even more important.
Thanks. More questions? Okay, I see a hand here. Just wait for the microphone.
A couple of the panelists, Julie Lindhout from Canada, a couple of panelists alluded to this, that it's not the leaders that make the country, but the country makes the leaders or the public, etc. And I'd like a little bit more elaboration on what you think of that, because Trump is not electing himself in these primaries. He's getting quite a bit of support. And I'm just wondering if the media and some of the elite are underestimating the level of discontent or the extent to which Trump is tapping into a particular mood in the US and how that could be counteracted.
I'd be happy to take a stab at that as a voting American. I think, you're absolutely right. You cannot blame it on Trump. I mean, this is a democracy. I mean, and we choose our leaders. I think there's a couple phenomena, and this is where it's actually, I think, useful to look at both the Sanders and Trump phenomena. I mean, politically, very disparate characters, but in some ways tapping into, the same phenomenon. One, structurally, there are real changes going on politically. I actually saw a graph, I wish I had it with me today, in terms of over the years, the rising percentage of voters who identify as independents versus the one or other party. So that certainly has played into both their candidacies. Trump is a complete outsider in terms of the Republican establishment. Sanders is, of course, a newly minted Democrat who just, although he caucused always with them, and absolutely discontent. And I think this was a phenomenon that virtually every pundit in America missed. And when I was still with the government overseas, I mean, I must say that I was assuring everyone, for example, that Donald Trump is a reality TV star. We love celebrities, but this will fade away. And I think that was a pretty broadly held view, not the case. There's, I mean, different groups, obviously, that make up their constituency. With Trump, you know, they talk about trade, but frankly, my feeling is that a lot of this is really code for race. I think we do still have the hope with Obama was we were going to enter into a post-racial era in America. I think that sadly has not proven to be the case. And I think Trump is very much tapping into this sense that, you know, we want America as it was 50 years ago,
yes,
when
right.
We had a white, male, Anglo-Saxon polity in the United States. I mean, I do believe that's a source of his things, because when he talks about trade and jobs, it's those people who are taking our jobs. Whereas if you look at it economically, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and so on, are just as well can be caught in economic downturns and so on. Sanders is I think, again, the independent voters. I mean, his victories in the election race have always, almost without exception, have been in open primary states or caucuses, which cater to the independent vote, and also the youth vote. Because I think the youth in America really were quite scarred, as many of us were, by the downturn, the recession. And we're lucky. We've got but we have 5% unemployment. Gas prices are low. So this, you know, this is actually a pretty good situation. But it's actually, I mean, a lot of people say when things are improving, that discontent can rise. And I think a lot of people were scarred by that, and they see uncertainty. And that's, for example, the free college has been a huge selling point of his. But again, you're absolutely right. This was missed by, you know, virtually everybody in Washington.
I'm not so sure about that, Laura. I mean, you know, that question I raised about my mate in the Sheffield pub yesterday. Yeah. I asked the same question to an American friend of mine who's a very sensible senior American who's voting Trump. And I said, basically, you know, why are you doing this? And he said, well, because we're throwing the dice. We're not stupid people. The establishment thinks we're stupid. We're not. We know he's got his limitations, but we're throwing the dice because we've been told for years, and he is a white American male of a certain age. We've been told for years that we have to accept in our liberal order that we have a responsibility to women and to ethnic minorities to build this society. And we've gone along with it for a lot of years, but we're losing. And whether we like it or not, there's a lot of people who feel that way, who aren't stupid. I'm seeing in the UK a large number of Labour voters switching towards UKIP. Mainly men, mainly middle-aged men, who feel that all they hear on the TV from politicians is about women and ethnic minorities. Well, what about me, they're saying. And I think we have to be careful here and confront this, that don't just accept that this liberal compact is accepted by huge swathes of society. If you come from somewhere like Pittsburgh or Sheffield, and you've seen your city transform beyond belief in a way you didn't want it, at some point you say, no, I won't accept that. Or I won't accept migration, or I won't accept this. So when I asked that question, to which I did not get an answer yesterday, the answer I was looking for was this. Change is inevitable, and we will work with you to ensure that as part of an equal society, everyone is prepared for the future. And that includes you. And I think Trump has very cleverly identified the kind of angry white man plus brigade, not all of whom are stupid. And I think it's that we have to address to make sure that it doesn't get worse.
We talked shortly about this before the panel with Julian. I would say it's the change stupid. The resentment has to do with the change or incapability to adapt to change. And the way I see it, you know, Obama won the election in 2008 with the change, and that was the bright side. Trump is the dark side of change.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Bernie Sanders might be the naive side of change.
Yeah.
Because the world is a bit more complicated than Star Wars.
Well said.
We see a question over here. I guess this is the maybe penultimate question.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Ivica Žužić, and I'm a member of the Atlantic Council of Montenegro. I thank you, the panelists, for being here and sharing their thoughts with us. First of all, I have a question for all the panelists. Donald Trump has been classified as one of the major threats for the global security and peace in the world, just like Brexit. So I would like to see, is there any, I mean, what would you classify as more dangerous, Trump or the Brexit, a possible Brexit? And Mr. Franchi, you mentioned maybe a new way of confronting terrorism or some other kinds of threat. What do you think about Italy's new way of confronting extremism? The Prime Minister Renzi, he proposed a culture, a fight versus terror with culture. So do you think that is maybe the right path, that we invest a bit more money in culture and we stop the penetration of terrorism in Europe? Thank you.
Shall I have a first bash at that one?
Sure.
Thank you. Brexit is by far the biggest danger, because once we've left the EU, we're going to rebuild the British Empire. So look out. No, I mean, look, politics doesn't work like this. If there are signs that the Brits really will vote to leave a week before the referendum, there'll be an amazing deal offered from Brussels or from Berlin or somewhere that will move the goalposts. And even if the Brits, I wrote a paper for the French about this, even if the Brits did stumble into leaving, we'd do a deal. I mean, that's the way, you know, the way international relations works between allies and friends is, before something undesirable, it's the end of the world about to happen. When the end of the world has happened, somehow we find a solution. So there would be some kind of deal. So let's, you know, let's calm down about that. And Prime Minister Renzi, it's a great line. We'll fight IS, Daesh with culture. Well, yeah. But it'll take a very, very long time to deploy culture in the way that the Prime Minister is talking about, and I laud his ideas. What do we do right now? You know, what do we do right now? And this is my challenge to the European elite. And I got into trouble when I was in Afghanistan at one point, because I wrote a note back to London saying, why are we sending British troops to fight, to keep Islamism at strategic distance, and we're allowing 3 million conservative Muslims from Punjab and Bangladesh into Britain? I was being deliberately provocative, because what I was trying to get the politicians to do was recognize the link between security policy and immigration policy. Now, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. But we have to strike a new balance between how we receive people that are coming here, how we make asylum systems genuinely work as asylum systems, how we, those who have no right to stay, how we humanely repatriate them with support. Because unless that's done, the kind of people, the guy in Sheffield and my American friend, that number will swell. So the elite have basically got to answer this question about the balance between security and immigration policy under the current pressures, if they're going to regain the trust of the people that the system works. So I would like Prime Minister Renzi's view on that.
Ambassador Stefanini, would you like to take that?
Well, I'm not in government anymore. Renzi is onto something, in the sense that any analyst will tell you that once you've defeated, say, once some troops enter Raqqa, is not the end of the Islamic State if you're not able to counter their appeal and their propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah.
But culture, called culture, is only part and a sort of a medium long-term response. So it has to be combined in an overall strategy. You also have to put into context when Renzi mentioned culture, that was a time he did not want to commit new military resource in the fight against ISIS, also because he thinks that Italy will have to reserve all its resources, also military resources, for Libya. So, Renzi being a politician, he square the circle.
Do you want to say anything?
I'm just going to say, in terms of Brexit, I agree with my president that that would be a huge loss for all of us, the UK, Europe, us, the United States, and I would submit the world, because I must say I have been in awe, really, of the power of the EU in terms of a motivating force and so on. I think I've said enough to know, for you to know, how I would regard a Trump presidency. I'm a committed multilateralist. This is someone who is 180 degrees the other way. But
To go on,
also I was
Laura,
going to say, in terms of
who are you voting for?
happy to say Hillary Clinton, no problem. But also, in terms of violent extremism, again, just one last thing on Hillary Clinton and her view of NATO. She gave a speech almost immediately after the Brussels bombing, which I thought was a very, very well-conceived speech in Stanford. And yet, in that, she had an entire passage on NATO. I don't have it with me, or I'd quote it to you. So, again, this is someone who believes that NATO has not, run its course, that it is very much a viable and a very valuable instrument.
So thank you so much for your question. I'm glad I didn't have to impose Tim's Montenegrin quota. If there's one more question, we can take it, but we have to be really quick. Otherwise, I would like to thank all the panelists. I don't see any hands. So thank you very much to the panelists and to the organizers. I think we had a great discussion.